recording. Hi, so I'm Jay Grunke from The Balanced Runner, and this is the Ask Jay hour on Friday. What is today?
19th.
19th. Thank you. The 19th of February, 2016. All right, and I'm going to pin my video. All right, and I have some questions that people have emailed in, including one or two that just came through in the last couple of minutes. Let's see. Just looking through. There's that. There's that. Okay. So I could tackle some of those, but Jonathan, do you have any questions for me?
I can see, Jonathan, in the chat, you've just said that unfortunately you don't think your microphone is working.
Oh, thanks for that.
Some people do struggle with getting their audio working, so there you go.
And you're saying your question is to do with tight hamstrings. And so we'll just work through the chat box here. Are both your hamstrings tight? I mean, well, all six. Both legs? Let's see. Let's, generally speaking, okay, tight hamstrings.
What I'll do, Jay, is I will play kind of radio producer for you and keep an eye on the chat. And then that way you can kind of speak and, do that. And then from time to time, I can just prompt you when there's a pause and say, oh, and by the way, we've got further comments or what have you.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Sounds great. Okay, so Jonathan, and now a few more questions. So when you say tight hamstrings, do you experience that when you're running or outside of running as a potential culprit that's suspected for running problems? And I'll just wait for your chat answer here. Matthew, can you tell me whether you see only me or yourself and Jonathan's little image?
I see you and me and Jonathan's image if he had his video on.
Okay. Let's see.
Which means whatever that thing is that you did to get a nice clean recording last time would be worth doing again.
Yeah, I have to figure out what it was.
But mainly people are going to get the audio here, so you know.
Oh, you know what it is? It's speaker view. So are you seeing just me now?
Well, the big picture is just you, of course, but I'm still seeing the gallery of the three of us above you.
All right. All right. In any case, I was waiting for a reply from Jonathan regarding when you feel your hamstrings tight, which I don't see. But okay. My answer for what the significance of that is and what to do about it is different, depending on whether you actually. Oh, here we go. Boy, I wish it gave me a little boop so I would know that a new line of text is here. Tightness does increase during running, but your hamstrings are generally tight. So, okay. So if you feel like you're struggling with your hamstrings as you run, then it's actually, then they're tightening because they're having to work too hard. And because they're being put in a position of mechanical disadvantage. And usually this has to do actually with the antagonist muscles resisting them. So even though it's all more complex than just agonist-antagonist pairs, still this is a fairly effective rule of thumb to use. So if you have trouble with your hamstrings that you experience while you're running, it's probably because your hamstrings are trying to fight your hip flexors and losing the battle. And your hips are a bit too flexed, which makes your hamstrings work very hard, but still not to be able to shorten like they'd like to. Yes. or overwork to control the deceleration of the leg in the forward swing. So regardless of which one of those it is, it's probably actually a hip flexor issue and possibly a calf issue, things that are keeping you too flexed. And not allowing you to extend yourself enough, which is what would make your hamstrings feel more comfortable. And so usually, so again, that is if you're experiencing hamstring discomfort during running. If you're not experiencing hamstring discomfort very much during running, but you notice that they're just generally tight in your life, that's a little bit of a different situation. In that case, you're dealing with just that it's your habit, because, okay, taking a step backwards, it's seldom productive to think about muscles as things, or your body as a thing. You're a person, and you're alive, and you're always making choices, albeit mostly unconsciously. Your nervous system, your brain, making choices about what is the best way to coordinate yourself in any given moment, and based on the best information that you have. And the best information that you have, the thing that you know how to do your life with hamstrings that are kind of short, and so you hold them short. And so it's not particularly productive to try and make them longer as if they were inanimate objects. What's productive is getting better information about how to function with how functioning with longer hamstrings in appropriate situations might make things a lot easier in your life. And so what I'm saying is that usually what's required is a learning process. And there's nothing like the Feldenkrais method for a learning process. That's why I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner as opposed to any other kind of practitioner, because I find that it works incredibly powerfully. But even simpler kinds of learning can really help. I heard an expert on stretching, a yoga teacher who's really up at the cutting edge of the science also on stretching, say that one way to think about tight muscles is that the range of motion through which you feel that they're tight is the range of motion where you don't know how to be strong, or where you don't know how to use them in a strong way. And so your nervous system will not let you get into a situation where your hamstrings are lengthened because you don't know how to exert any strength in that position. And so even a fitness method for dealing with that is to actually work on strengthening your hamstrings in longer length positions. And a really simple way to get you started on that is actually to get into sort of a deadlift position, but without a weight. I'm going to try and demonstrate a little bit here. We'll see if I'm going to take my headphones off so I won't hear anything for a moment. You see our messy living room. But anyway, so you get yourself into a position where your back is straight, you're bending forward, and so your hamstrings are very long in this position, but they're also working to keep you from falling on your face or bending even farther. And so you feel both things. You go to a point where you feel a stretch, where you're also feeling work, and you hold it. And you can even increase the effort by increasing the amount of weight by extending your arms forward or out to the side. You hold it for 10 breaths. You hold it for a minute. Your hamstrings will get quite tired. You'll experience this funny mixed feeling of stretch and work, and then you can come up, and then when you do it again, you'll find actually that you can go down farther because your nervous system has worked out that like you can actually control your movement here. And when you can control your movement in a particular range of motion, then your brain will let you do that range of motion. So that's a very productive way to lengthen your hamstrings if that's something that you find really hampers your movement. But again, it all depends on, It all depends on whether tight hamstrings are the primary problem that you're trying to solve, or if you're trying to deal with, or if they're a consequence of something else, a consequence of something going on in your running gait, or a suspected culprit for some other kind of running injury. So that is, unfortunately, it's a little bit trickier without the mic working, and we can't quite have a back and forth and narrow down the options. But hopefully that gives you enough of an overview of the factors involved that you can start working on a solution for yourself. Would you type something back to me in the chat here and let me know if that answers your question, or if you have any follow-up questions about that?
Jay, while we're waiting for Jonathan to do that, would it help to, and again, everyone's unique, but would it help at all to share with Jonathan the journey that you and I took with my tight hamstrings?
Well, why don't you?
Okay.
Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So, Jonathan, I first met Jay 2 years ago, and I had just been back in kind of club level competitive running and for about 6 months. And I found that I could not shake my hamstring niggles, no matter what I did. And I've been running now for about 40 years and have always been known to be very flexible. So I did a lot of stretching. And if anything, I'm kind of ridiculously flexible compared to all of my club mates. But flexibility is not the same as necessarily kind of warding off these issues that can crop up. So Jay will give a much more accurate kind of assessment of what was really going wrong and what it was that it kind of unlocked all of this. But what I believe is fundamentally it went back to kind of getting better and better at applying what Jay has created and called the keys to balanced running. And so where my foot contacts the ground nowadays is much more likely to be under my center of gravity and not kind of overstriding, particularly when I'm accelerating on the track when we're doing our speed work and so on. And so that issue is gone. And it's just a case of running much more smoothly in balance and not going, as Jay says, where the muscles and the body says, wait a second, we're not safe here.
Yeah, and actually, I've got a reply from Jonathan. It sounds like his situation is very similar to what yours was, which is he wants to know a bit more about how the hip flexors and calves and how that may be the issue. And that was, as I recall, the issue for you is, if your calves don't allow your ankles to bend enough, then you'll have a hard time getting your pelvis over your foot in mid-stance. You'll be sitting back a little bit like you were sitting in a chair instead of with your hips balanced over your foot. Ditto if your hip flexors are tight. So in some ways, it's hard to tell just from considering your running gait which of those two muscle groups basically it would be. And in fact, oftentimes they're both tight, because if you can't go to a range of motion because of one, you can't go to for the other. So it has no reason to be anything other than tight. And so all of this means that your center of gravity is behind your foot in mid-stance. And it means that your legs are getting flung too far in front of you through your whole gait cycle. So because like any cycle, it's a self-perpetuating phenomenon. If there's one part of it where your weight tends to be too far back, that'll affect how you do the next part of it and the next part of it and the next part of it until you circle all the way around to the same position again. So you can't have one part of the gait cycle be awry, but the rest of it working perfectly fine. So again, keeping your hip flexors and your or your calves tight, put your center of gravity behind your foot in mid-stance, and means that your feet are always a little bit too far forward relative to your hips through your whole gait cycle. And because, then there's another step here, because the main action of your muscles in running is not to generate the movement actively, the way it would appear to be the case, but actually to decelerate parts of your body and create pre-stretch so that your elastic tissues get loaded, which is a bit more complicated of a concept. An important thing that your hamstrings do is that when your leg is swinging forward, your hamstrings fire to stop it in time for, and pull it back and down in time for you to land on it. And if your weight is always too far back, your leg is getting flung too far forward and probably with too much force. And so this just pulls at your hamstring every time as it's trying to shorten and the leg is going. And then you can end up with a great deal of stress in your hamstrings. And perhaps that is your problem. I'm starting to get a hunch that that's what it is. And so in that case, you can work on the hamstrings forever, just like Matthew worked on the hamstrings forever, and he went to a bunch of therapists. Then actually someone did give him glute exercises, which were helpful to a degree, because they're antagonists to the hip flexors, and so they kind of make the hip flexors let go a bit and put the center of gravity in a better position, and so then the hamstrings aren't asked to be doing something unreasonable. So that's a work strengthening, doing glute exercises because of the effect that it has on your hip flexors, can be a modestly effective way to deal with this problem.
And for my experience, I would emphasize the word modestly, by the way, because in my case, Jonathan, I'd been doing exercises like that for probably about 4 months before I saw Jay. And the truth of the matter is, I was still carrying that injury, at least in one hamstring and usually in both legs throughout cross-country season, throughout the winter. And it was just a constant drag. And I think what was probably happening was whenever I felt reasonably okay again on the track in particular, I'd be reaching forward with each foot to get as much stride length and kind of power and speed as I could. But, when you're trying to reach that far forward, there's no doubt that I was going to be way back relative to the center of gravity, and thus compounding the problem, putting a lot more load on my hamstrings.
Yeah, exactly. And so the thing that really regulates this, and like Matthew said, if glute exercises worked, I would never have met him. And so we can be grateful.
That's right.
But the thing that really works, and I was actually, just before this call, I was sitting down and creating the pro document for Feldenkrais practitioners. So among the perks available in the GoGo campaign, there's an option for Feldenkrais practitioners and other professionals who work with runners to get extra help in applying what they learn to their practice. And so I was just writing for Feldenkrais practitioners. What comes to the center of the matter literally is the movement of your core, what I call your core action, because that regulates the activity between your flexor muscles throughout your body and your extensor muscles throughout your body. And what that means is that it will bring your hip flexors and calves into balance with your hamstrings. And your glute, well, in hamstrings it's a little bit complex case, but and glutes. And so what this will do is it will stop you from being behind your feet. It will put you over your feet, and you'll no longer have to fight your hip flexors to get forward enough. And your hamstrings will no longer be at a mechanical disadvantage. And furthermore, your lateral weight shift will be easier, and so that makes it easier and easier to swing the legs. It really relieves the hamstrings very well, and your running overall improves. And so that's the real cure for this, and we all move our pelvises at least a little bit when we run, or we really couldn't run at all. But because we all sit so much, that both biases us to keep our hip flexors short, and potentially calves too, depending on where you like to put your feet when you're sitting, and have our center of gravity behind our feet, and stop moving our pelvis around because it's just plop there in the chair. And so then all this stuff gets really difficult for running. Does that answer your question? And I'll just wait for a reply in the chat on that. Let's see. And let's see. Slowly getting better at these video controls on Zoom. There's a reason I'm a body and movement person and not in the tech industry.
Yeah. You can detach the chat box and have it sat alongside the video display.
That's what I've got.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm just
Crowdcast will
looking
make it
back
all.
and see. Yeah. So I'm going to, since again it's just the three of us here, and I realize it's a tricky time of day. It's hard to schedule these things so that they work for potentially all
Here we
time
go.
zones.
Here's a
So
reply from
yes,
Jonathan.
I see the reply here. Thanks. So Jonathan says, so the answer to shorten up my stride and ensure my foot lands under my center of mass, or is there something more recore action? Well, I'm not saying you have to shorten your stride. That's just going to add to your discomfort. I'm saying you have to move your pelvis. And then actually that can potentially give you a longer stride without necessarily slowing down your stride rate, but it will relieve your hamstrings because it will bring the muscle tonus in your hip flexors and your hamstrings and glutes into balance. Do you see that distinction? And again, I'll wait for an answer. Meanwhile, I did get a number of questions. Oh. And as a matter of fact, the questions are coming in at the moment. So I'm just going to juggle between my email and the chat box and the screen. So let me see. I have someone asking for more details on stretches for plantar fasciitis. Listened to my webinar, but had to leave before it was completely done. Okay, the key thing to know about stretches for plantar fasciitis, Rebecca, is not to do them. Because the problem is not that your plantar fascia is tight. The problem, again, is that your weight is in the wrong place. And again, actually a little too far back relative to your foot, but with slight differences in location and the muscle action involved, so that instead of getting in the hamstring or in the knees, you're getting shearing on the sole of your foot. So if you, let me see, I got myself a little doll. So we'll see how well this works. Okay. This little model is not a natural runner, but okay. So here, trying to and failing to, because the knee won't bend enough, but there we go. Get into mid stance. The elbows also won't bend enough. It's the first human form I've ever met that I would just really say, you know, you weren't meant to run. Just don't. Doctors and physio say that all the time, right?
Yep.
Okay. Anyway, okay. Here is, ideally, ignore the arms because I can't make them work, but here is mid stance. Whew, did it. Okay, and so this is a good mid stance because the hip joint, we just pretend that's the hip joint, is directly below or above the ankle joint. And so the downward force, 2.5 times body weight or more, is supported by the foot. However, if mid stance is like this with the hip joint vertically behind the ankle joint, you see that the hip joint, if you drew a straight line down, it would be behind the ankle joint, means that as you then approach toe off, your weight is still too far back at the point in which you should leave the ground, and so your foot is trying to push off at the same time it's being sort of pushed. There's backward force, and so as a result, the plantar fascia is stretched and pulled and micro-torn as you try and push off, as opposed to the weight being far enough back, in which case you just leave the ground. I hope that was clear. So in other words, it's already like a pulling and a tearing that's causing the pain and the inflammation in your feet. And then every night you go to bed and your body does its best to heal that while you sleep. And in the morning when you wake up, there's some scar tissue there, and it's a little bit stiff, and you get up and you step on your feet, and the scar tissue, because the healing job is not completely done, and you're probably still even because of the pain in your feet and worsening, digging you deeper into a hole of keeping your weight back behind your feet. Your weight is probably in a bad place even for walking. And so every step is just miserable as that scar tissue kind of crunches open again, and you walk in a way that creates that same sort of stress, stretching and sort of pulling the heel and the front of the foot away from each other as you try and push off. So stretching is the very last thing that you need. The very first thing that you need is to be able to feel how comfortably and safely to get your center of gravity far enough forward that this kind of shearing stress isn't being created on the sole of your foot. And which brings us back to the core action, which makes me sound like a broken record. But, as I said in the webinar, and I've just been saying an awful lot lately, if your weight is in the wrong place, there's nothing else you can really do that will make a difference. There are other things that matter, nuances. If your weight is in the right place, there are still ways that you can make your running even better. That your body's main way for getting your weight in the right place when you run is through your core action, which balances the effort and the tonus in your flexor and extensor muscles, allows you to do the opposite things on the two sides of your body, allows you to shift your weight easily from leg to leg, and allows you to release your weight forward from the front of your foot instead of this painful pushing backwards thing that the foot does. The very best thing that you can do there, let's see, I did give a little list of things that you could do, which probably was after you had to sign off the webinar. But you can do glute exercises for the same reason that can sometimes help with hamstring problems, because it helps get your weight a little more forward. It can also help with plantar fascia problems. You have to help your nervous system learn how to fire your extensors again, especially your calf muscles. And so actually, the opposite of stretching, learning how to lift yourself up onto your toes and let your calf muscles get stronger at doing that, and through your whole body to lift yourself up on your toes, actually will help a lot with your running. Yeah, and for reasons that I explained in the webinar, which I'm sure you did hear because it was early enough on, the other conventional things for plantar fasciitis, the icing and the anti-inflammatory medication are not going to be productive. So your plantar fascia can feel a lot faster, quickly, by cultivating your core action. Even just doing exercises in the gym that move your pelvis through space. I mean, an abdominal exercise so simple as all right, here we go again. Oh, I can try it with I can see that I'm going to have trouble with this. I can try it with my little doll as like a cable pull that just turns you through space, where you take hold of a cable. Stand up, would you? All right. And you pull it from one side and you pull it to the other. This turns your pelvis through space, articulates your hip joints, and that's a very great exercise for a runner. And you see, you can't do that if you bend your knees. Well, even still, you can't really turn very well unless you're balanced and you're neither too far back nor too far forward. If you're pulling straight from one side to the other side, you'll have to be balanced over your feet, not too far back and not too far forward. And so that will help with getting your weight in the right place when you run as well. All right, I officially like the doll, but I need a better one. If anyone can recommend a better doll, email me. So, side bending exercises. Ooh. Okay, this pelvis doesn't side bend. But like this, because your pelvis also needs to go this way to get your weight over one foot and then this way to get your weight over the other. So you can see there's a bit of a side bending movement for that. So side bends that cause your pelvis to move around, also very helpful for running. Okay, I can't ask Rebecca if I answered a question because it was emailed in, but I talked an awful lot, so hopefully I covered it. Let me just pop back here to let's see, and Jonathan is not sure he sees the distinction, but I've just talked a bit about moving the pelvis, so hopefully that clarified a bit.
I think the doll helps, you know that, Jay?
Yeah, the doll helps?
Well, it does, because you showed how the doll was slightly sitting down in mid-stance.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have chatted about this. Jonathan, I had an injury spell late autumn, and so I ended up doing a lot of kind of stand-in assistant coaching for our club. And when you're kind of standing back and doing some of the coaching and not in the middle of the workout session, of course, you can see a lot of things that you don't see as easily when you're kind of thrashing yourself in the middle of the team. And it was amazing how many of our runners do have their weight back behind the center of gravity. And in one or two cases, they actually are almost sitting down part way. I don't know if you've ever come across this. You know, we used to have our PE teacher would make us do the invisible chair exercise when you're propped up against the wall, and how, you know, your thighs get really tired and all that kind of jazz. And they say it's really good for skiers, apparently, because it strengthens your quads. Don't know, not a skier. But it's a really goofy thing to try to do if you're a runner, is to sit partway down and then try to run properly. So it's not an accident. I mean, I've never chatted with you, Jay, about the history of, you know, your company name, but it's called the Balanced Runner for a reason, because it's remarkable how few people run in a nice, upward, elegant, and balanced way.
Yeah.
And so no matter how complex it might sound for people to think, oh my God, you know, she's talking about this and then she's talking about the other thing, in a way, all you're saying is you just need to be able to move your body in such a way that you remain balanced over your feet and your center of gravity. They just happen to be a number of moving parts that make that happen.
Yeah, exactly. And it, you know, it's only complicated because in some ways it's complicated, but it's also complicated just because it's not the prism through which we've been seeing movement.
Yeah.
And so it requires a mental shift to think of things this way. Oh,
and Jonathan says, yes, that last bit was useful. Thank you.
Good. And now I just want to clarify, just to make sure there are no misunderstandings arising from the very helpful thing that you just said, Matthew. Just to clarify with the doll, that also there's this doll needs Feldenkrais lessons. So many problems. Okay. Just get the arms forward out of the way. That you do need to have a forward lean when you run. So your hip joint will be over your ankle joint at mid-stance. We'll just ignore this other leg, which isn't being a swing leg very effectively. But anyway, so this is mid-stance. Ignore the other leg. Oops, that's mid-stance. But notice that the torso is on a forward angle. It's not, let me see if I can execute this. It's not upright, because then when you push forward, where's your weight going to go? You need the push to push through your spine to your head. And so this is why we have a forward lean when we run. And I know that there's a lot of there's a lot of confusion around that, partially because of the language, because people say run upright, meaning you don't bend at the waist and, you know, be flexed like that when you run. I'm not suggesting that either, or slouch forward like that when you run. You should have a straight torso, but it should be on a forward angle rather than perpendicular to the field of gravity. So
we'll talk about leaning forward ever so slightly from the ankles, Jay. What would you say about that as a form of description?
Oh, well, that's how I say it. That's Danny Dreyer's phrase from She Running, but I think it's a good one. The thing that you have to remember is that in mid-stance, actually, it's going to look like your butt is sticking out. But as long as your butt is not behind your standing foot, but over your ankle, you are fine. But by the time you push off, you'll be in a long straight line going forward, except of course that leg is, that just needs a hip replacement, really. That leg is, oh geez. Anyway, going forward. But so when you see that sort of long, straight forward line is going into flight. And that's when you have this moment that looks like lean forward from the angle. And the other time that you see it is when you're starting running from a standstill. You know, your first step, you sort of sway like a tree falling over, and then you take your first step. And so there you've got a foot on the ground, and your ankle is bending, and your body goes forward on a straight line. And that's, you could look at that and say, oh yeah, that's leaning forward from the ankle for sure.
And we're using gravity to help pull us forward. And as you often describe, the way the East Africans run so gracefully.
Yes, that's right. And you can, yes, and you can simultaneously look at it that way, and also in terms of the kind of push that you've got to create through your spine. I mean, everything that's really true about running can be explained in 12 different ways and related to everything else that's really true about running. So it's both true that you use an initial input of gravity to begin your running, and that organizes you so that you can be pushing your skeleton forward, and that all human activities that take place at speed that I can think of take place with a forward lean: riding a galloping horse, riding a bicycle fast, riding a motorcycle, downhill skiing. Since we mentioned skiing, it's the same principle for all of these activities. I want to
so we don't want to get too close to Michael Johnson style.
Wait, I'm gonna actually interrupt you there, Matthew, because I want to loop back to some of the questions that have been emailed in here. I've answered Rebecca's question, and let's see. So I have a question. Let's see. Let's see. So I have a question. Well, let me get to the most pressing. Because that was 45 minutes. There's no danger that an hour was going to be too long. I have no problem having things to say about running. That's for sure. Let me see. So we have that question. We've got. Okay, so we've got a question. Somebody named Nick asks, do you notice that runners find that soreness, blisters, corns on the soles of their feet resolve when they learn to run while following Feldenkrais techniques? I've had sore heels for many years now, only recently diagnosed as corns. They seem fine when the podiatrist removes the corns, but then a few weeks later they start to feel sore again, and I have to go back for more corn removal. So I don't know fully about the etiology, is that the word, for corns, but if we're thinking about if it's similar to what causes blisters and just general calluses in particular areas or hot spots on your feet when you run, it's caused by friction. And I just, in answering Rebecca's question, I just described a way that that there can be a stress created on the sole of the foot leading to plantar fasciitis, that you're both you're trying to move forward off the foot, but your weight is still too far back, so the foot gets sort of pushed backwards at the same time as you're trying to move forwards, and it creates this stress in the plantar fascia. And variations of that can also cause blisters, particularly if a runner then tries to get their weight forward by pivoting on a foot. Then you'll get a blister or chronic callus in that location. And so, yeah, all that stuff goes away with Feldenkrais lessons. There, for some kinds of thick, hard, dry skin on the soles of the feet, it's not so much movement issue as it is, sometimes it's a nutritional issue. I've read, this is totally outside of my scope of practice, so I'm not expressing a personal opinion, but I have seen people suggesting that sometimes you have these like very thickened skin can happen on the heels, thick cracking heels, that sort of thing, from too much sugar in the diet. I have no idea whether it's true, but that may be an avenue for you to explore as well. Let me see. So That is Nick. We have a question. Let's see. There's a question about the actually about my online running camp and the monthly masterclass, about how much personal attention is given and or questions answered, or whether it's just purely recordings and entirely up to the runner to learn by themselves. And the answer is that there's a lot of interaction. You know, that each runner can make a choice how involved they want to become. If you like to have your own private learning process, you're totally free to do that. But I'm always looking for lots of feedback and interaction, because that's how I can be sure that you're getting what you need and helping you really grow. And so in the online running camp, there's the Facebook group, the private Facebook group. The things that you post there don't show up in your news feed. No one will see them except the other people in that Facebook group. That's what it means that it's private. But I'm in there regularly looking at the questions that are asked and answering them. And I really love it when people ask for help in that setting, because there's almost no question that a runner would have in a camp that other runners also don't have. And so this way I can help a lot of people by helping one person. I'm also, just like I'm doing right now, there are live Q&A calls where you can just come on and ask me your questions, or listen and learn to the questions that other people ask. And I'm always available by email as well. If you want more interaction than that, if you want me to look at video of you running and consult with you about that, and then kind of help direct you through the camp, that's the VIP camp. That's an extra charge. During 2015, I did that for all of the runners in my camps, but I had to keep the camps very small in order to do that, and it took truly a massive amount of time. And I learned from that I can't possibly have 20 runners in a camp and do that for everybody. I'd have to charge so much. I'd have to charge my full living because I wouldn't have time to do anything else. And so that's why I created the VIP level of camp. So if you know that you like a lot of feedback and interaction, then that's your better choice. So that's the camp. And then the master class, there's a lot of interaction that goes on. To begin with, it's made up entirely of graduates of the camp or people who've worked one-to-one with me in person. And so I know everybody already going into the master class, and I've been there with you through your learning process, and I know what you're dealing with and kind of how you run, even if I haven't seen video, because at this point I can just tell. And there's a Facebook group for that. And because a lot of the runners already know each other from being in the class together, from being in the camp together, there's a very mutually supportive atmosphere. I'm in there, again, answering questions. You can post video in there. You know, if you did it every day, it might be a bit much, but no one does. You know, if you have the occasional question about what you're doing, yeah, post video there, and I'll look at it, and other people look at it, and we'll all learn from that. And again, I'm available by email as well. And we'll also do the occasional Q&A call for that, because there's no substitute for being able to talk sometimes. So there's potentially a great deal of interaction, really as much as you want to take advantage of. So that's the answer to that question. Let me see. Good. Going back to my email. Someone who got my special gift after my webinar, the Tips, Tricks, and Strategies PDF through the Indiegogo campaign that I give to people who attended my webinar either this week or the previous. And I had recommended doing lunges as cross-training and as a good warm-up. That is probably one of the more conventional recommendations that I make. I don't make very many really conventional recommendations, but that's a good exercise. But I have Kevin here saying that he has trouble doing lunges because of knee pain on the top of the left knee. And so that probably stems right back to the same dynamics that cause knee pain in running, having your quads have to work very hard to keep you from sitting on the ground. And so again, I mean, when we do lunges, we don't often think of the pelvis moving. The pelvis needs to move the same as in running. I mean, otherwise you can't balance in the lunge. So if when you do lunges, you feel like you have to struggle not to fall over, then you're not moving your pelvis enough and shifting your weight. And your head should actually come to be fairly in line with the front leg when you lunge. It doesn't stay between the two legs. If it does, it's a quad killer. And may seem like a great quad exercise, but it promotes very unfortunate movement habits. So your weight should shift so that your head relates to your front foot. And so it may be that, Kevin, just having that in mind when you've got your left foot forward will help a bit with the left knee pain because it puts your weight in a better place, or it might not be enough to just try that. You're probably moving your torso, changing the shape of your torso in order to shift your weight differently with the left leg than you are with the right leg. And you may need a little bit more of an in-depth learning experience to sort that out. Is there anything that you could do as a substitute? If depends on whether you wanted to do lunges as a warm-up for running or as a cross-training exercise. If you want to do it just as a warm-up, what I suggest you do is actually do my warm-up. On my YouTube channel, I have 2 warm-up videos. One is a calf warm-up, which actually every single runner I've ever given it to, no matter what their situation or how well they were running, finds that they run better after doing that calf warm-up. It just sets you up really well. So I recommend that you find that. If you go to youtube.com/balanced runner, you'll be at my YouTube channel. And you can just look for the calf Achilles warm-up and 2 other key warm-up moves. And those 2 other warm-up moves warm up the hip joints. And there are no lunges in that, but they'll do the job. So you could substitute those for lunges in a warm-up setting. And for strength training exercises, there are lots of other things that you can do that work your quads, glutes, and hamstrings. And so I would just say do a wide variety of movement, but just don't do the lunges until you get the problem sorted out, until we get the problem sorted out. Let me see. So, going back to my email now. I have a question, and I think that this is one that a number of people had about being a beginning runner, or someone maybe who has run in the past, but not for many years, and can't run comfortably now, but would really like to run. And I agree that this is a little bit of a different case, and it's a question I get a lot. I love to work with beginning runners, or people coming back after a multi-decade layoff, because I can help you get off on the right foot, so to speak. But there's also there's so many ways in which your body needs to adapt to running in that case, fitness-wise, tissue strength-wise, bone strength-wise, and not just movement-wise. And then there are the reasons why even running a little bit right now is uncomfortable for you. So here's what I recommend. I recommend that you get a training plan to help you get started running again. And you understand that you're going to do this really gradually, because what's the rush? If you can do it gradually but steadily and really get there, that's much better than trying to rush into it and then getting hurt because you overdid. Because you didn't allow your body the chance to gradually get stronger. So one option that I think is really great is Jeff Galloway's run-walk approach. And there are some people who are even very experienced runners who prefer that approach and find that their race times for marathon, half marathon are faster run-walking than if they just ran steadily through. So Jeff with a J, Galloway with 2 L's, an American guy. He's got a whole system. He's got a timer that you can use, but it's not terribly expensive, and you can get you can probably get enough free resources off his website to give you everything that you need to get started. And so that's a really great way to get started running fitness-wise. Another option is the Maffetone method. And you can, I'm not sure what Phil Maffetone's main go-to book for that is, but honestly, if you just go to his website, Phil, Phil, Maffetone, Maffetone, I think there are enough guidelines again on his website to get you started. You need a heart rate monitor for that. But it keeps you running, honestly, really slowly, and in a zone where the stress is easy to recover from, and you're going to keep from overdoing it. So that's another way to get started. Those are the two things that I'd recommend for a training plan. And then aim to run 3 days a week on non-consecutive days, so you're giving your body a chance to recover between runs. And also do other fitness activities, maybe swim on the off days or go for walks or do a little bit of yoga that doesn't involve deep stretching. These would be my recommendations. So that's the fitness side of things. And then the movement side of things, generally what I find is that people who struggle to run, who haven't run in decades or have never run and find it uncomfortable, generally speaking, it's because you're running in too flexed a position again. And that's with your pelvis potentially way behind your feet in mid stance. And so you have, and that means that your legs are way in front of you. And so you get a big jolt every time you land on one foot, and a ton of work every time you're balanced in mid stance. And it's very hard to push yourself forward. And so you feel very heavy, and it feels like a pounding, and you get hurt really easily. And I set up the online running camp with a sequence of lessons that will help you get out of that pretty quickly, starting with really learning how your core action works and how to allow that to regulate where your weight is over your feet so that you don't get the jolt, you don't get the stress in mid-stance, and so it's easy to move forward off your feet. And then you get way fewer aches and pains, and you'll find that you're able to gradually ease yourself into running that feels good. And you feel better than all of the serious runners that you know. So I hope that is helpful for Misha and anybody else out there who's a beginning runner. And I think there was someone on the webinar Wednesday who asked a similar question, and I didn't get to it. So hopefully helpful. We're just running to the end of the hour. I'm just going to pop back into my email one more time and see if there were any questions. Any other questions? Let's see. No, I think we can finish there. Let me bring myself back to the recording. Matthew, is there anything that you'd like to contribute before we wrap up?
Just one thing, where this could all lead to. I think, Jay, I've loved hearing how you described that in your own style. I'll just give a sentence or two of my experience, if I may, because let's say, you and I, we had never met 2 years ago. I had last run competitively 35 years ago. I've kind of kept my hand in all those years, but the step up from casual kind of fitness level running to competitive training and racing is quite a steep one. It's the equivalent of what I was doing at university when I was on the team there. And not only did you get me through serious injuries that frankly would have sidelined me, and I don't know if I would have ever found my way out of that hole, but where this led to was I'm now running smoother than I ever have in my life, even in my 20s. It's culminated thus far in me winning a silver medal at the Scottish Masters Track Championships in the summer in the 1500 meters. And even now, I keep running kind of faster and smoother and with less effort. And things that somebody else watching this replay may not think of, like I can breathe better than I ever used to. So as you say, the whole body contributes to how we kind of hold ourselves and move. And when we do that in harmony with how the body really wants to move, all kinds of things open up. Whether you want to run faster or smoother and less effort, the whole thing leads to being able to have a much more enjoyable and natural feeling experience. And if that's helped anybody kind of shed some light on what that might mean, then I'd be thrilled.
Great. Thanks. I totally forgot even that having help breathing was something that you came to me with, because, it happens so easily that you forget about things that used to be problems even, and I'm so glad for how you're running now, and to hear and see you enjoying it. So we will finish here. As you no doubt know, if you're watching this, my Indiegogo campaign finishes at midnight tomorrow. And the online running camps are the best way to get all of these benefits, because it's 6 weeks of learning, and then followed with the masterclass as well. And then there are special gifts that come that I've added to all of the online running camps: adaptable full and half marathon training plans from Lisa Hamilton of The Conscious Runner, Melody Fairchild's tips on using visualization for competition. It's an absolutely beautiful document that she's created, and the Punk Rope Manual from Tim Haft of Punk Rope. Any longtime reader of my blog knows how strongly I advocate building your movement skills and your agility and your versatility. And jump rope is a fabulous way to do that. I am available by email. If you have any further questions, please reach out to me. I would be delighted to answer. And I hope that you'll take this opportunity to enroll yourself in one of my camps for 60% off, which is a price that will not happen again after this Indiegogo campaign ends. So midnight tomorrow night is the end of that. The first camp begins on May 15th, but when you purchase the camp through the Indiegogo campaign, it's not specific to a date. So I'll be running the camp, I plan 2 more times after the May camp in 2016, and then again in 2017. So you can wait until you find one that fits your schedule if the May one doesn't work. So you don't need to concern yourself with that. Thank you so much. I hope very much that I helped with your running, and I wish for you that all your running dreams come true.